So an iceberg is a chart about a certain topic with tiers of popularity. On the top of the iceberg you get the more casually known facts, but as you go further down the iceberg they become more and more obscure. Now with how much I already talk about The Walking Dead on the channel, just how obscure can these things be? Watch till the end to find out. This will be my first iceberg video on the channel. I'm going to start with The Walking Dead of course, then do Telltale's The Walking Dead, and then do Breaking Bad. Let's get into it. Of course, before we do, make sure you press the subscribe button right now on the channel so that you are the first to see my videos. So I've made my own iceberg chart completely, and I've got 5 tiers, and I've named each of them in my own little weird way. The first one being called Basic Tip, with the more casually known facts. Then there's Underwater, Murky Waters, The Deep, and then finally the Deep Dark Unknown. So let's start with Tier 1, the Basic Tip. Title decay. For years in The Walking Dead, people would notice that slowly the title screen would show a different Walking Dead logo. With each season it would decay more, and it wasn't until season 11 where they straight up just started showing it crumbling away. But before then it was only a slight change, and people thought that it was actually signalling that the zombies in the show itself were slowly decaying with the title screen, and that they would die down altogether. But the show kind of just embraced it, and it's no longer a subtlety. Now it's the final season, they just straight up show you some effect that is all crumbling away because it's ending. I think it's always possible they were trying to see something about the zombies, but from 10 years ago a lot of stuff has changed. Obviously now with certain plans in place and a certain new variant, it's taken a more exuberant approach to say the least. Next up, the characters don't actually ever say zombie, because in this universe they don't know that that's even a concept. They don't have any zombie movies or zombie games. It was previously explained by Robert Kirkman that in that universe they don't actually know that exists. Now in the alternate reality, in the comic universe, you hear Lee say it.
The keys are on that zombie out on the street. I think Doug's not great around zombies.
Which I'll obviously talk about in my Telltale Iceberg video. But it's interesting that sometimes in the comics it has been mentioned, but in the show they wouldn't ever do that. Next up we have Frank Darabont cut short, and I'm going to combine it with Jeffrey DeMunn. Jeffrey DeMunn was Dale. In season 2 he was shockingly torn apart by a zombie. That was one of the first ever character deaths that really shook me, along with John Marston. Frank Darabont leaving is basically what caused Jeffrey DeMunn to leave that early on. He was meant to go on to like at least season 4, season 5. This is basically why the walkers in season 1 shuffled a bit faster. They pick things up, climb fences. I blame it on it just being the start of the apocalypse. But in reality it's because Frank Darabont left. He had this different vision of the zombies in season 1. That's almost certainly the reason he didn't. Next up we have Beta was actually a famous country singer before the apocalypse, and it's something that Tales of the Walking Dead is going to show more of. In Fear the Walking Dead there were pictures of Beta unmasked as a singer, and just towards the end of season 10, just before his death, they would just straight up show you that as well with his album. In an episode of World Beyond we even see this Dennis character has one of Beta's albums. In the comics Beta was a famous NBA player because of course he's tall, that makes sense. In the show however they changed it to a country singer, which also makes sense and is quite funny because he doesn't like noise, so we're still yet to see what caused that. Next up we have helicopters. Helicopters appear many times throughout The Walking Dead, however their meanings are actually all separate from it just being the CRM. In fact 25 or maybe even 30% of these appearances aren't the CRM. When Rick exits the hospital in season 1 episode 1, he sees a military helicopter left over by the outbreak, so not necessarily at all CRM related. And again when he returns to Atlanta and goes to the city, he weirdly sees another helicopter, and it's him seeing this and following it that leads him to almost a really early death. Now this is why I was going to put helicopters in tier 2, because not a lot of people realise this is not a CRM helicopter. It's actually teasing the governor's appearance in season 3, because this would be the helicopter we see in season 3 would exit the show, and then in Rick's final episode he hallucinates a mermation of blackbirds that turn into a swarm of helicopters, just 40 minutes before he would finally leave the show for good and the helicopter would take him away. We haven't seen helicopters in the main show since. In World Beyond, however, they appear regularly, as it's literally set at the CRM and at their bases around the US. Occasionally in Fear the Walking Dead they will appear when the CRM are close. In Fear they used Althea a lot as their input of the CRM stuff, and their irritating thing with the Isabel character. Helicopters on the main show have been avoided and had no appearances since Rick left, because it's of course going to be solely associated with Rick Grimes. If you see a helicopter in the main show, you're going to start to think Rick's going to come back pretty soon, or the group will find out about his survival. No doubt the final episodes in the main show will bring some hints of the CRM as the characters become more and more aware of Rick Grimes actually being alive. Helicopters in The Walking Dead though have always largely been to do with Rick.
Hey, helicopter boy! Come say hello!
That is almost completely associated with the CRM now, so any mention of the CRM in the show, that to me is a Rick mention. It was made for Rick. It was always going to be expanding the universe with Rick alongside it. He's the protagonist of it. Next up, we have Daryl Dixon wasn't actually in the comics, and this is something that's always really intrigued me. They actually just really liked Norman Reedus, so they gave him his own character, and it's probably, along with the Carol and T-Dog mix-up, which I'm going to get onto later down in the Iceberg, I think is one of the best choices the show has done. Having Daryl as a character, and he went on to become the face of The Walking Dead. Daryl was massively inspired by Dwight in the comics, even though he appeared a lot later on. Him using a crossbow and having the same biker vest. A lot of inspiration was taken from him on the Iceberg as well, so let's get into it. We are officially on Underwater. Let's start with Toy Story similarities. On the 22nd of May 2013, a YouTube channel by the name of John Ray uploaded the Walking Dead vs Toy Story comparison, where he surprisingly really accurately goes through the similarities of the first 3 Toy Story movies and the first 3 seasons of The Walking Dead. This is the story of a sheriff. He's the leader of a motley group thrown together by fate, living in a world of beings that want to chew them up or tear them apart. And it's always really made me laugh because he shows the nursery or kindergarten scene, whatever you want to call it, and compares it to when Rick gets trapped in the tank or when they're hiding under the RV on the highway. If that happens, some will be left out to rot, but others will be doomed to walk the earth. Broken, disfigured, shadows of their former selves. What keeps the sheriff going is his love for his little boy, but his boy starts spending a lot of time with someone else, an ultra macho officer of the law. Insanely jealous, the sheriff corners his rival against a police cruiser.
You stay away from him. He's mine.
That is my son. That is my unborn child.
And no one is taking him away from me.
Then he compares Lotso to the governor, and I think that is by far the most accurate thing, because it is exactly like the governor, the way he introduces them to the kindergarten, the nursery, or whatever you want to call it, the same way the governor does to the group with Woodbury. It is really well put together. It's something that's always really intrigued me, and it's really eerie and things like that. The fact it's about Pixar as well, which in itself I think is quite an eerie topic. If you want me to do an Iceberg about Pixar, then let me know, because I'd love to do that. And something crazy to add to this, and I mean this might be a whole other video, but I actually watched Toy Story 4 quite recently, and it's about them getting out the Forky character from the antique shop. They're trying to get him out. Is that not the exact same plot as the Rick Grimes movies, with him being taken and kept away and the other characters going to get him? That is so interesting. I'm gonna have to go into that in a whole other video after this one's come out. But there you go, the Toy Story similarities, and if Toy Story 4 is anything to go by, the Toy Story predictions too. Next up, we have Space Spore. Now, you might remember me talking about this in the video from 2020 when Robert Kirkman tweeted out in reply to a fan, Space Spore was the reason for the zombie virus in The Walking Dead. Now, he was referencing Night of the Living Dead when that was the reason for it, and it was a comedic sort of reference. But now, going back to the end credit scene of World Beyond, we have a woman talking about it as if it was man-made. But the thing is, when it comes to Space Spore, although he was being facetious, like I said in that video when I spoke about the tweet, it is just really possible it is some kind of space spore, or it came from space, and the scientists, which we're going to talk about much further down the Iceberg, advanced on it. As silly as it sounds, it being man-made or coming from space isn't off the cards at all. In The Walking Dead World Beyond Season 1 Episode 7, one of Huck's friends in the military talk about it being a space spore, and that was being spoke about on the news.
I heard it came back in a rocket, that it started in space. Somebody breathed it in, turned their stomachs, and Then they got on a plane.
Shut up, Owens.
That could even be some kind of cover-up for what it actually turned out to be, because the end credit scene of World Beyond in Season 2 seemed to blame two particular teams for the virus, so a spaceport is likely a silly cover-up. Then we have Rick was going to lose his hand. In Season 3, when the governor arrived, Rick was actually going to lose his arm the same way he did in the comics. The governor was going to cut his arm off, but they decided not to do it to avoid complications of CGI and green screen, because obviously, as opposed to Merle Dixon losing it, he wasn't going to be as much as a long-running character as Rick. It would have been complicated and restricting to film and for the story, so I think it was essentially the better choice. And I just get bored of characters losing their arms now. I've got fatigue of it. It happens all the time in everything I watch, and especially in the universe of The Walking Dead, it almost feels like a cheat code for character development. I mean, that hideous Elton character in World Beyond, awful. I don't know why they had to do that. It's like they were embracing the fact that he did nothing the entire show apart from be really cringy, so cut his arm off, he's been through it. Next up, we have the water tower comic scene. This is something that I've spoke about and joked about on the channel for a while, because I love this scene so much. In issue 158, when Beta made his march towards Alexandria with his big walker herd and the remaining whisperers, Gabriel was on a water tower scouting the area to warn the group that they were coming, but he was up there for too long and got scared. On a rush down to the bottom of the water tower, he climbs down the ladder, falls, breaks his ankle, and Beta guts him. "You should have whispered," he says, and the walkers devour him. This was in no way some introduction death, such as the Lucille lineup scene or the Pikes, so I knew there was such a big chance he wouldn't come. Much closer to when this comic scene would have arrived in the show and been adapted, this show seemed to display a much calmer Beta in regards to Alpha dying. In the comics, it was more of a wild beast sort of thing that he did, but it was just done completely differently, and then I think the finale ruined it. Season 10, episode 15 was actually called The Tower. They obviously most likely knew what they were doing with that when it was that exact time in the show that the water tower scene would happen. They just called the hospital that they stayed in to protect themselves from Beta's herd The Tower, which I think is really stupid. Obviously, early season 10, the show would show a much more nervous Gabriel, and I still think even though he's calmer now in the current time in season 11, it does continue to show a more erratic Gabriel. In season 10, episode 19, one more with Aaron and Gabriel, they did pay a lot more attention again on the water tower, but it doesn't mean that was ever going to happen. It doesn't physically mean anything, it's symbolism, because Gabriel died in the comics like that on a water tower. It's a really Angela Kang sort of thing to do, to rub on that fact, to foreshadow that in the near future Gabriel in the show will die. It doesn't mean anything like the water tower death though, just that he will die. And talking of the tower, next up we have same hospital used twice. I'll go over this because again this is a relatively known one, but you just might not know it. Basically, the tower they used in season 10 episode 15 and 16 to hide from Beta and the herd is the same one that Beth died in. When they walk out with Beth's body, it's the same one that Beta infiltrates. Shane is Judith's father. Again, this is relatively known, but it was actually teased in season 7 episode 4 when Rick actually suspects himself that Judith might be Shane's. And this is something that I wasn't going to put in it because I honestly just don't care. Not because I don't care about Rick or Judith or whatever, but to me I've never found interest in theorizing who's related to who, because especially in the apocalypse I don't think relatives matter in that regard. And lastly, in tier 2 underwater we have Andrea cut short. Andrea was actually set to go on to at least season 7. She would have likely even made it to season 9 sort of time and got her comic death. When she was filming, just nights before it would happen, the actress Laurie Holden was told that she would die when she was actually promised to go on to at least season 7, season 9 probably. Just like the comics, she would eventually end up with Rick as well. So what Michonne did in that season, Andrea was meant to do. I didn't mind Andrea, I quite liked her. I once made a top 10 worst Walking Dead characters video. I mean, I don't agree with everything I said on that video at all. Looking back on it, I sound like a completely different person, but it had a lot of unexpected characters on there, because what I think makes a worst character or a bad character is one where the person that the character portrays does the complete opposite of what it's meant to do. But Laurie and Andrea, they weren't bad characters, they did what they were meant to do. I think what you mean is the person that it portrays and projects is what you don't like. You know, you could say Nicholas is the worst character, but he's actually not. He's just the worst person. The character did what he was meant to, which was make you hate him, but he's not the worst character. You know, Laurie and Andrea were bitches a lot of the time. I mean, more so with Laurie story, of course, but I think they did what they were meant to do, and I would have liked to see Andrew go on. Now we are on to Tier 3, Murky Waters. Let's start with Abraham Fate Foreshadowed. In Season 6, Episode 16, that Lucille lineup scene happened, Negan arrived, it was a big cliffhanger. Throughout that whole episode, Abraham is foreshadowed to be the character that dies so much. Simon says to Rick, how would you like this to be the last day on Earth for someone in that RV? He shows Abraham.
Probably have to kill one of you, that's just the way it is, but then we can start moving forward on business.
It was just so obvious, and I didn't do YouTube until 2019, but if I had done it in 2016, I would have said Abraham to you, and that's not one word of a fucking lie. And look at him stand up to Negan. He's the only person Negan needed to kill in that lineup because he was the bigger person, and the only person to stand up to him and show that he wasn't scared physically. Such a great character. Just before they're ambushed as well, he starts talking to Sasha saying, could you do what Maggie and Glenn are doing? And that was obviously a sign that he was going to die too, but it also connected to Glenn much later, unfortunately. Essentially, Maggie and Sasha did have to do the same thing. They both carried their loved ones out of there, buried them, and then went on to be their own individuals, not in a relationship and grieving, and Sasha died for it. And Maggie, in the end, I mean, for the most part, went on to be a stronger character. I'll leave it at that. Next up, we have the Breaking Bad connection. Now, this is something I've always really wanted to talk about, and I don't think I have. I've never made a video just about this. I've made a video about a coincidence between two episodes in these shows, but the Breaking Bad connection is so interesting to me.
Oh, and make sure you talk to the general manager. His name is Glenn.
Glenn. Look at him. Vultures. Hey, go on, strip it clean.
Just so many Easter eggs. Let's obviously start with the blue meth. In Merle's drug bag, you can see Walter's signature blue meth. That's literally his product in his bag. Then, of course, Glenn is seen in the red Dodge Challenger, and it's exactly the same car as the one used in Breaking Bad when Walt Jr. is gifted a car by Walt. But that's not the only connection. The real connection is when Skylar says,
oh, and make sure you talk to the general manager. His name is Glenn.
The person she spoke with about this car is called Glenn. Walter even repeats it.
Glenn.
There's a possibility, a link, that this is the same Glenn that Skylar spoke to, which would suggest they are in the same universe. In Fear the Walking Dead, you can hear the Heisenberg theme play in the background. Daryl then describes a skinny white guy that sounds a lot like Jesse.
Merle had the stealer, this janky little white guy. He pulls a gun, sticks it right here, and says, I'm gonna kill you, bitch.
See, these are all Easter eggs. They are both AMC shows after all. How early on Breaking Bad is set, as far as we know, it hasn't gone past the 2011-2010 timeline. El Camino is set shortly after. The biggest possibility we have of Breaking Bad's world going past the Walking Dead's timeline in which the apocalypse existed, which would mean it isn't in the same universe, is if Better Call Saul in Season 6 shows a time in the future where they have modern iPhones. There is nothing to say they aren't in the same universe. These are just fun little Easter eggs, but those are some real connections there. People always refute that with Badger and Skinny Pete said zombie, it can't be. That is such a small thing. Something as small as that can't refute all these other small things that have happened. I mean, them mentioning Glenn like that when it happened to be the exact same car that he had, after saying he always wanted to drive one of them and keep it, that is an even bigger connection. The fact they said zombies doesn't matter, they were high out of their mind. Retcon would be an overstatement. It wouldn't even need to be retconned. So what if they said it? They can just start adding that Rick knows what Left 4 Dead is and stuff like that. I promise that doesn't matter. If they wanted to do an episode in Tales of the Walking Dead where Jesse went to Alaska and the apocalypse started, they can most certainly do it, and these are some really interesting connections. I'm likely going to make a whole video just about it. Next up, we have Carol took T-Dog's place. When T-Dog died in Season 3, it was a sacrificial death. Some felt like it was too early. In that episode where he died, it was really likely Carol could have also died with him. But T-Dog was actually originally set up to go on, and Carol would have died in the prison. And as much as I do like Carol, I would have really liked to see T-Dog in the current world that this is in now. I do think they should have kept a lot of those earlier characters in it, so it felt a bit more grounded. Now, this switch up was allegedly because the actor for T-Dog, Iron E. Singleton, kept being late to shoots. Next up, we have Rick Grimes is likely ambidextrous, and combined with his anxiety disorder he had after Laurie died, this could mean also schizophrenic. This doesn't mean he is schizophrenic just because he's ambidextrous, but combined with how he reacted to Laurie's death and how he dealt with it, there's actually a theory online that he is schizophrenic, and that's why he was seeing things and had it a lot more rough than the usual case of that disorder. Seeing a zombified Laurie is when that theory starts to ring a bit more true. Just think about all the times in the show where Rick Grimes has been deemed as mad. Next up, we have Abraham likely met Daniel in Fear the Walking Dead. This is one of my favourite Walking Dead things to talk about. It's heavily suggested in Fear the Walking Dead Season 5 that Daniel previously met Abraham. Fear the Walking Dead has always been quite a bit behind in the timeline than The Walking Dead. Even when Morgan joined the show from Season 8 of The Walking Dead, in Season 9 it would then jump a further year, and then obviously The Walking Dead did another 7-year time jump, so Fear's always been behind, even with Fear itself having time jumps. And it's hinted at a lot that shortly after the Season 3 dam explosion, Abraham saved Daniel, or at least took him away from that area, because after that time period he went missing for a really long time. When he returned, he was reformed, and more importantly, he was in Texas. He lets these characters into the warehouse that he's been staying at, and he says, take all the supplies you need, but when Sarah grabs his cigar, he says,
"Friend asked me to save this for when things get better."
And a lot of attention is paid to the detail of the cigar. It's the exact type of cigar that Abraham iconically had in Season 6, and he clearly holds it close to his heart, so he's clearly had some kind of previous affiliation with Abraham. And I do think, unless there's some kind of flashback and relevance to the story in Fear, I think in Tales of the Walking Dead they will show an episode of Abraham saving Daniel from the dam, because obviously Tales of the Walking Dead, each episode in that show is going to be its own story. And of course you've got the Althea character who interviews people in the apocalypse. She has a tape with Abe and Doc written on it, obviously Abraham and Doc meaning Eugene, because he said he was a professor. And in addition to all of this, but in no way vital to it being to do with Abraham, when Daniel returned in Season 5, he had a ginger cat with him called Skidmark. If that isn't something Abraham would call a cat, then I don't know what is. And like I said, it's ginger. So from Althea having allegedly interviewed Abraham before, to Daniel having the exact same cigar as Abraham did in Season 6, and the ginger cat with the funny name that just happened to appear out of nowhere with Daniel in Season 5, it's way too much for it not to turn out to be Abraham, bearing in mind the Fear Season 3 finale actually happened around the exact same time Abraham and Eugene were in Texas, around the time they met Rosita. The only relevance I think this would have in Fear, if they didn't do it in Tales and they did it in the actual show itself, is if Morgan reveals to Daniel that Abraham did die from the Saviors and that Dwight was previously a part of that and would mean conflict with them, which I think would be really cool in itself. Now we're on to Tier 4, the Deep, the Vatos fate. The Vatos were a Spanish gang seen in Season 1. They met the original group in Atlanta, they stole their weapon bag, and they kidnapped Glenn. Rick and a few others then went to go and get the guns and Glenn back, but they went in there and it wasn't the big drug lord gang they thought it originally was. It was a bunch of old people with some chihuahuas.
Thought you were being eaten by dogs, man.
Now, ever since I've made videos, people have asked a lot, do a video about the Vatos gang, and I've never really understood that, because in the deleted scenes, it's already been shown that they were completely wiped out. That's why they've never appeared again, because they're just all dead. That's all there is about the Vatos, but it's just not that known. And I think it was deleted because what this was originally intended to do was show that the governor was arriving on the show, which you would eventually do in Season 3. It's not confirmed that that's what they were doing it for, but I think that's why they would even take that out and not have it just be a possibility that they could eventually come back. But I'm not sure why there's such a craze about the Vatos gang. It reminds me of the original end credit scene for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield. In the deleted end credit scene, it was said that his dad would come back, and the whole point of those movies is his dad's dead, his mum's dead, everyone's dead. For him to come back is a massive game changer, but they deleted it, so it's not really canon to that universe. So we could say the same about this, but again, would they bring it back after so long? I think it's just been faded out into something that just doesn't matter now. It was so long ago, especially in the show's universe, that it wouldn't make sense, and it should just be according to that deleted scene that they are indeed dead. I just hope the chihuahuas are okay. Next up, we have the Sadiq betrayal theory. Now, this is something that I dived into head first in 2019. It was one of the first videos I ever did. And people put words in my mouth about it. They're like, no, Sadiq's not a spy, he's not a traitor. I didn't say that. Betrayal is a single act. It's a single thing that he could have done to this day still, but it just was never went into. It's still a really grey area of how Alpha got those characters into the barn. There's a lot of stuff that happened in that episode that's still so left to the imagination, and that's what's so eerie about it. Alpha, the leader of the Whisperers, got 12 of these characters into a barn. One of them survived, and it was Sadiq. In that episode, Alpha eyed up many of the characters, one of them being Rosita. Somehow she didn't die. With Sadiq being the only one surviving, he was left to tell the story. He was overcome with so much guilt because he was the one that remained alive. He thought he could have done something more. And that whole theory was just suggesting, how did Sadiq end up in that barn then and survive it? And there's a lot of weird things that happen in episode 15, where just before the Pikes happened, that do show Sadiq with Enid, and it will eternally be this grey area that they will just never show. There's a lot of stuff they didn't show from that barn. It doesn't mean Sadiq's a horrible person for doing it. Again, no, he's not a whisperer, he's not a spy, he's not anything like that. Betrayal, did he turn his back on someone? Did Alpha force him to do something leading to him being so guilty and lead to some sick reward of him being able to live because he helped her? Did he help Alpha get them in the barn? Because if he didn't, Rosita and her baby would die, and obviously Rosita's baby is his baby too, so it really makes sense, and Angela Kang just never went into it. That's something that you can of course decide for yourself. Let me say that again. No, he's not a whisperer, he's not a spy, he's not anything like that. Some things are just never picked back up, and when we returned in season 10, we find out that Sadiq is undergoing massive guilt and PTSD from what he went through, and he never recovered from it, and they went the Dante route. I love what they did with Dante. In the comics, Dante was such a good Glenn type of character, and he eventually got with Maggie, but obviously shortly after season 9, Angela Kang made some appropriate changes. Open your eyes. Next up, we have Maggie's leaked fate. I remember this. It was October 22nd, 2016. I was really excited to wake up and find out who had died in the Lucille lineup. But on that night, I see something on Twitter. It was Maggie getting her head done in. This leaked footage would show Maggie getting hit on the head once by Lucille, Glenn screaming, then getting knocked out, and Abraham in the background just watching it happen. Maggie spits out blood at Negan in disrespect, which I love, and then is finished. The first red herring is Glenn being knocked out. 9 times out of 10 in anything you watch or play, a character will have to watch a character die, and Abraham would never in a million years just stay there watching it happen. They obviously filmed all of the character deaths in that lineup to avoid leaks, and we do see a glimpse of each of them being hit on the head by Lucille in Rick's visions in the final episode that came out. Do I think AMC purposefully released this leak to trick people into thinking Maggie actually died? Maybe. It does look like it with that big black bar in the middle. It's like they've tried really hard to make it look like it's leaked. I have said that since Glenn died, I would have preferred if Maggie died instead, but there's so much I love about season 7 episode 1 when these two characters both died that I wouldn't want to take that back. But in an alternate universe, to see Glenn with the way the show is right now, I think it would be a lot better to see Glenn trying not to kill Negan when he's been a character that's been so against that. It would be so much more interesting to see Glenn in the position that Maggie is in, I think. Next up, we have Days Gone. Deacon Walker. In episode 1, when Rick Grimes goes into that tank, this Walker is played by the same actor that played Deacon in Days Gone, which is amazing. He's such a cool character in that game, and not a lot of people loved that character, but I think he's quite cool. I mean, the game had issues, but it was cool. It's cool that he's technically been face to face with Rick. And on to the last of this tier, we have the CRM, Heath, and A&B. The CRM stands for Civic Republic Military, and these are the people that took Rick Grimes in his final episode. You could say the helicopter group, but as far as we know, it's a city of 200,000 people. They have many different bases across the US. Their 3-circle symbol stands for the Alliance of the Three: Omaha, Portland, and likely from the Rick Grimes movies we saw Philadelphia. The CRM are next level. They have cities, agriculture, electricity, water supplies. They have everything. They live almost normally as if the apocalypse never happened. We also found out in Seasons of World Beyond that they trick people, governments of cities, into having an alliance with them, only to eventually wipe them out. Their plan is to be the last place standing. Their quote that they go by is, "We are the last light of the world," but all they do is snuff out other lights. They are extremely secretive, and they are indeed looking for a cure. Angela Kang has heavily suggested that Heath is at the CRM. She basically said the seeds have been planted if Corey Hawkins wants to return. If he wants to come back, if he agrees, he can. And we obviously see that his RV at Jadis' junkyard, so it's suggested he's gone to the CRM to work for them. Or at the very least, if the actor doesn't want to come back, they will say that he was traded and experimented on, but that's what's happened to him. It's really likely they won't go any other way. The narration around his disappearance as well was that he was indeed kidnapped. His glasses were on the floor, there were tire tracks. It looked like he had some kind of scuffle and was taken, which brings us onto A and B. This is something we heard first from Jadis when she tried to trade Rick as an A, then Negan, and then finally Gabriel. When Rick was saved in his final episode, she said he was a B so that he didn't end up in Elizabeth's lab, so that's how we know he's not been experimented on, but forced to work for them most likely, yeah. A is meaning right now, after bitten, B is before, and A means you end up in the lab, B means you are a worker, a soldier. However, the letters don't necessarily relate to a word, like A means after bitten, B means before bitten. A does mean after bitten and you get sent to the lab, but B doesn't mean just before bitten. It just means you work for the CRM, you get to live for them. Depending on if they've got plans for Heath, he will either be an A or a B. If he doesn't want to come back, they'll put him as an A. He just got sent to the lab. I'd love a future Rick movie reference where Rick is looking at old stuff that they've done and he sees a picture of a zombified Heath and he's like, wait a minute, I knew him, this is what you're up to. That would be so cool. I don't think that will happen, but I'd love that if it did. Now on to Deep Dark Unknown. Sorry Brother. In 2013, a game called The Walking Dead Survival Instinct came out. This game is set in the TV universe, and in the prologue you play as Daryl Dixon's dad, Will Dixon. He's torn apart by walkers, so Daryl comes along to put him down, but he can't do it. His half-uncle Jess Collins does it for him, and he says, "Sorry, brother," in the exact same way that Daryl says to Dale in season 2 of the TV show.
Sorry, brother.
Daryl put down Dale exactly how his uncle put down his dad. This is where he got it from. This game came out in 2013, which was just around the time season 3 was going on, and I really like that that's something they've added with all of that game's flaws. It was a really fun game. I made a whole video about this over a year ago now, where I broke down the entire story of Survival Instinct, so if you want to watch that, that'll be in the top right of your screen right about now. Then we have the woman that looked after Rick in The Oath. In the mini Walking Dead webisode series that was released by AMC, we see a woman named Gail who looked after people and lived at the same hospital that Rick was at when he was in a coma, and he went weeks and weeks without being tended to and looked after. And for most of this time, this woman is heavily suggested to have looked after him and helped him survive. Obviously, when he woke up, he sees a corpse that looks a lot like her and is allegedly her. That's not confirmed though, but this is the woman that looked after Rick. Next up, we have My Lonely Walker theory. It basically says that lone walker that was seen in season 2 episode 10 represented Shane, but after Shane had died, they took the walker back again and put it in the intro sequence in season 5 where Rick lost his humanity more. He didn't care as much. As long as it was for his family, he would do anything. And they had it in all the intro sequences all through the seasons until season 9 where Rick left, so it came when Rick lost his humanity and then left again when Rick also left. In 2014, Robert Kirkman came out for the first time and said he knows how The Walking Dead ends. And it was that same October they would use this Lonely Walker again. Back when this Lone Walker appeared in the show, when Shane looked out at the car window and saw this Lone Walker drifting away, he saw it as himself drifting away from the group, what he was becoming. He felt alone. But who else was in the car with him? Rick. This theory suggests that at the end of The Walking Dead, likely the end of the Rick movies, Rick will be a lone walker. And what's really interesting is that the final issue of the Walking Dead comics actually started with a lone walker. If you want to watch the original video I did on my theory, then on the top right of your screen right about now, a card will drop down and you can go and watch that and then come back to this. Next up, we have new walkers, Franz and the Primrose and Violet team. At the end of The Walking Dead World Beyond, there's an end credit scene that does show a new variant of walker. This new variant, that Dr. Jenner says is a cohort variant, and as we see, it survives a headshot, it gets up, it seems to have some kind of memory from before as it goes to the door, and it smashes into it. It's faster and stronger because there appears to be dents on the door. This is a new walker. They talk French in this scene, so we can assume it's France. Dr. Jenner previously said ages ago in season 1 that France was the last place standing, and here we see in France there are cohort variants. So we can assume the reason we haven't seen these new variants in any Walking Dead shows yet is because it's all in the US right now. In France it could be a completely different place. These two characters here talk of the Primrose and Violet team. This person was part of the Violet team, and they are both responsible for the virus. This character says all the teams, so there could even be more than the Primrose and Violet team, but either way there are teams of doctors involved in the creation and or the breakout of the virus. And this is all no doubt going to play a massive part in the Rick Grimes movies. I do think it will be him that finds more of all of this out, and hopefully he will also be the resolve to it. Even if that does mean sacrifice, I think that would be a really, really cool end to his story. Although that is sad, I think there's something really great about it, and as you can tell from my Lonely Walker theory, I've seen that from the start with Rick, that he would end like that. I mean, it does change things from the comics because the show has made remixes, and so it does steer Rick away from that, but even before the comics, I've always just thought that's how he would end. Those videos of me saying he would eventually die in the very end, way before he died in the comics anyway. Although Rick hasn't been there in that comic story arc in the show, I think Robert Kirkman killing him like that shows what the plan was for Rick. Remember, it was in 2014 where Robert Kirkman said he knew the end of The Walking Dead, and that's when he started showing The Lonely Walker, so it's not unlikely he knew plans of how Rick's story was going to end too, all the way back then. A lot of stuff has changed though, like with Rick leaving the show, so obviously whatever happens it will be done in a much grander style. Next up, and what I think is one of the most unknown things about The Walking Dead, is Rick saw the future. In Season 9, Episode 5, Rick hallucinates a lot of things, but the most odd thing is he hallucinates some city that we haven't seen before. Now, I at first thought it was just Atlanta, but in June 2019, a viewer of mine, Toby Farrant, contacted me and said, this isn't actually Atlanta, because I'd never played too much into it before. I just assumed, okay, he's looking at himself in the hospital, it's just Atlanta, just some random city. But he actually said, no, this is the city that Rick is in right now, and he saw that in his hallucination. Not to say that Rick is some psychic, but in the show they're teasing where he will eventually end up, and it makes sense. You can see the birds here making a mermation, and then they turn into a swarm of helicopters. Bearing in mind, this was way before the end of this episode. This was at the very start of it. So in about 40 minutes time, that's when a helicopter would come and save him. But before that, Rick was just seeing helicopters randomly. It was a swarm. The show is telling the future. Rick saw the future. This is the city that he's at right now, the city of 200,000 people at the CRM in the darkest place we haven't seen yet, with Rick bleeding out, looking over a previous version of himself in the hospital bed, like himself back in Season 1 as well. Do you think this is also foreshadowing that he will also wake up at the CRM? I mean, obviously he's got to recover from what he went through, and I do think that will be the first shot we see of the first Rick movie. And lastly, joined with Rick seeing the city, is Rick's ghosts. His hallucinations definitely told the future in that regard, and actually throughout his final episode he had each of these characters coming back from the dead to tell him different things. You've got Shane talking about being strong, fighting. He says, you want answers, you want to know what this is all about. Shane's appearance foreshadows the discovery of how the apocalypse even happened, motivation, and preparing Rick for the future. Herschel says to Rick, we will all get there eventually. His appearance was about hope and actually foreshadowing a newer civil civilization. And Sasha's appearance in his final episode alone was just a bit odd, because there's so many other characters he would have imagined. Like with Sasha, because she's a character that sacrificed herself, and what she does is ensure Rick that death is not the end. It's bigger than all of them, and there's a bigger meaning. And I think all of this combined is about finding the cure, which it would turn out to be, like I said in this video, Rick's fate revealed. How Rick will save everyone, and Rick Grimes' immune and cure theory. I do think there's something that Rick will have to do to sacrifice himself for the cure with the CRM. His final episode predicted a lot of the future, and I think it will continue to. I mean, with things like Shane and Herschel revisiting Rick in his final episode, it was obviously just a goodbye to Rick and Andrew Lincoln. But this is just the deeper meaning behind it, the symbolism. The bigger thing being the city and Rick looking over himself. That was not Atlanta. But this is it. This is my ultimate Walking Dead Iceberg. I don't think I'm going to do another one on the TV show. I could do a part 2, but I think I'm more going to do it on Telltale's The Walking Dead next, and then Breaking Bad. Of course, leave your suggestions down below of what you want me to do it on, and let me know what you would have added to your iceberg list. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you press the like button. In about 20 seconds, my other videos will pop up, so make sure you go and check them out if you liked it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.